Greetings to all of you. I greet you in the name of Jesus, our blessed hope. Well, I want to talk with you this evening about Israel's fate in the wars of the end times. Every time a war breaks out in the Middle East, my phone starts ringing off the hook, and I start getting email messages like you wouldn't believe, asking me one question. Is it the war of Armageddon? That's always the question, over and over. Is this the war of Armageddon? This question is prompted by the fact that most people are familiar with only one end-time war, the one that has been popularized in movies and novels as the Battle of Armageddon. In fact, this afternoon when Paul was speaking, I noticed that book after book after book that he put on the screen had the word Armageddon in the title of it. So that is what most people know about the end times. There's going to be a Battle of Armageddon. This term literally means, or rather it comes from Revelation chapter 16:16, which in Hebrew it says is called Armageddon. It says in the end times that the nations of the world will gather at Armageddon. In Hebrew, that literally means the Mount of Megiddo. The Mount of Megiddo. This is an aerial photograph of Megiddo, which is an ancient fortress dating back thousands of years ago that always controlled the valley of Armageddon. Now, the Valley of Armageddon is known in Israel as the Jezreel Valley. It lies in front of Megiddo. It runs diagonally across Israel from Haifa on the Mediterranean to the Jordan River. Most people are surprised to discover that there is no reference in the book of Revelation to the Valley of Armageddon, only Armageddon. Nor is there any reference to the Battle of Armageddon, but we'll talk more about that later on. People are even more surprised to learn that Bible prophecy reveals 9 wars in the end times, and that Armageddon relates to only one of those 9 wars. Most prophetic scholars have long believed that the next great end-time war will be the war of Gog and Magog that is described in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Incidentally, that's not misspelled up there where it talks about the Mideast peace process. That's a sarcastic comment on what's going on in the Middle East as Israel is being divided up in the name of peace. The idea that this will be the next war of Bible prophecy is the stated position, for example, of Joel Rosenberg in his popular book, The Epicenter. This war will start when Russia invades Israel with certain specified allies, all of whom are Muslim nations today. But I seriously doubt, personally, that the conflict described in Ezekiel 38 and 39 will be the next war of the end times. I feel that way for 2 reasons. First, there is a condition for the war in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that simply does not exist today. And there is no prospect for it to exist in the near future. 3 times in Ezekiel 38, verses 8, 11, and 14, it says this war will occur when the people of Israel are living securely in unwalled villages. It is this requirement that has motivated most modern-day prophecy scholars, like men like John Walvoord, for example, to place the Gog and Magog war after the beginning of the tribulation, because the tribulation begins with the Antichrist signing a treaty that appears to bring peace to Israel. Since that's the only way they can imagine peace would come to Israel, they say, okay, then the Gog and Magog war has to begin after the tribulation starts. And I certainly can understand that argument. I don't agree with that argument, but I understand it. I would certainly agree that Israel is not living securely today in unwalled villages. Either internally or externally do they have security. Internally, there is the constant threat of missile attacks from Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and terrorist attacks from Palestinians. Externally, there is the constant threat of war. Israel was born in war, and Israel has remained in a state of war ever since it was established. Sometimes we just don't realize how many wars there have been in Israel. Israel began with the War of Independence, 1948-49. Then came the Suez War in 1956. Then the Six-Day War in 1967. Then came the War of Attrition from 1967 to 1970. Next came the war that Israel almost lost, the Yom Kippur War of 1973. In 1982 was the Lebanese War. In 1987 to 1993 was the first Arab Intifada. In 1991, the first Gulf War. 2000 to 2004, the second Arab Intifada. 2006, the Hezbollah War. 2008 to 9, the war with Hamas. It goes on and on and on. The Bible says that the nation will be established in one day, and the next day the birth pangs will begin. And they did. And they continue to this day. I would argue that Israel is not only insecure, but that is the most insecure nation in the world when it comes to external security, not internal security. I'll go to Israel and walk around the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem at night and never feel any problem at all. I wouldn't do that in Dallas, Texas. But it's the most insecure nation in the world externally. It is the only nation I know of where every village that's built there is built out of reinforced concrete, all the houses, all the buildings, everything, because they build for war. It is the only nation I know of where every apartment building, every house, every community of single-family houses has to have a bomb shelter within walking distance. It is a nation so insecure that it has built a wall that meanders almost 400 miles to protect its citizens from terrorists, and it's been very effective. In fact, I would argue that Israel is currently more insecure than in any time in its history for two reasons. First, the missile attacks that can be launched any moment by Syria and other nations. The next war in Israel is going to be unlike any other war that Israel's ever fought, because when it breaks out, thousands of missiles are going to literally rain down on Tel Aviv. And the second reason it's more insecure than ever before is because of its abandonment by the Obama administration. The second reason that I doubt that the war of Ezekiel 38 and 39 will be the next end-time war of Bible prophecy is because the nations mentioned as allies of Russia do not include a single Arab state, not one that has a common border with Israel. I don't know if you ever thought about that or not. Not a single one has a common border with Israel. Instead, the nations identified are Persia, which is Iran and possibly also Iraq, Cush, which is the Sudan, Put, which is Libya, and possibly Algeria and Tunisia also, and then Gomer and Beth Togarmah, which of course is modern-day Turkey. As you can see, none of these Russian allies, not a single one, has a common border with Israel. Specifically, there is no mention whatsoever of Egypt, of Jordan, of Syria, of Lebanon, or Gaza. This produces an important question. Why is it that none of the nations located next to Israel are mentioned as allies of Russia in the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war? I personally believe that the best explanation of this mystery is the one supplied by Bill Solis in his book, Israelstein. He proposes that the next prophetic end-time war will most likely be that described in Psalm 83. A war between Israel and its immediate neighbors. He believes this war will produce the conditions that are necessary for the war of Ezekiel 38 and 39, and I agree with that conclusion. With that point clarified, let's now take an overview of the end-time prophetic wars in what I think is their logical order. The first, the war of Israeli extermination, described in Psalm 83. Psalm 83 states that the immediate neighbors of Israel will launch a war for the purpose of wiping out Israel as a nation. The nations described as being a part of this nefarious effort are those with a common border with Israel, including Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Gaza. All of these with a common border. The second half of Psalm 83 is a prayer for Israel's victory. The outcome of the war is not specifically stated in Psalm 83, but we know from other scriptures that Israel will be victorious. For example, Zechariah 12:6 says that in the end times Israel will be like a fire pot among pieces of wood and a flaming torch among sheaves, so that they will consume on the right hand and on the left all the surrounding peoples. They're going to be like David against Goliath. Bill Solis believes this war of annihilation will boomerang on the Arab nations and will result in their overwhelming defeat, producing great territorial expansion, enhanced national resources for Israel, and yes, peace for Israel. Incidentally, it's during this war that Israel will most likely destroy Damascus in fulfillment of the prophecies in Isaiah 17 and Jeremiah 19, which says that in the end times Damascus will be destroyed and it will never be built again. But the security provided by Psalm 83 war will not last long, because what will happen is that the Arab nations will turn to their natural ally Russia and cry out for help, resulting in the first war of Gog and Magog, the war described in Ezekiel 38 and 9. This is where Russia comes down against Israel with certain specified Muslim allies. The Russians will be delighted to respond to the Arab cry for help because they have always dreamed of taking over the oil fields of the Middle East. They will therefore launch an invasion for the stated purpose of helping the Muslims destroy Israel. Their specific allies will involve the outer ring of Muslim states that surround Israel, all but Saudi Arabia. Now, I believe that the unstated agenda of the Russians and their real motivation will be to use the Arab invitation as an excuse to expand their sovereignty over all the Middle East. This ulterior motive is described in Ezekiel 38:12, where it says the Russians will come to capture spoil and to seize plunder. The invading armies will be supernaturally destroyed by God on the mountains of Israel. The Lord will accomplish this destruction through earthquakes and pestilence, hail, fire, and brimstone, and battlefield confusion. Even the Jewish people will recognize that the victory belongs to God, and it will open many of their hearts to the Lord. The greatest mystery concerning this war is its timing. Most have placed it at the beginning of the tribulation. Others have delayed it to the middle of the tribulation. But increasingly in recent years, the tendency has been to place it before the beginning of the tribulation. The reason there's so much question is because the Bible does not say for sure when it will occur. And there is room for honest disagreement on this. Probably every person on this program has a different view as to when this war will occur. So there's room for honest disagreement. In recent years, as said, the most common view that's coming out these days is that this war will start before the tribulation. The best discussion of timing that has yet been written, I think, can be found in this book, Northern Storm Rising, by Ron Rhodes, who lives in Frisco, Texas. He's a great writer. He concludes that this war of Gog and Magog will most likely occur 3.5 years before the tribulation starts. Now here's his reasoning. The tribulation lasts 7 years. Ezekiel 39:9 says that the Jews will spend 7 years burning the weapons that they capture in that war, likely nuclear fuel. But they're going to be burning weapons that they capture in that war for 7 years. But Revelation 12 tells us that 3.5 years into the tribulation, the Jews will be evicted from the land by the Antichrist, and most will flee to Jordan. Therefore, the only way the Jews could spend 7 years burning the weapons, Ron argues, is for the war to begin 3.5 years before the start of the tribulation. This brings up another question. Does this mean that the wars of Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 and 39 must occur before the rapture? Not at all. The rapture can occur any moment, before, during, or after these wars. Keep in mind that the rapture is not what starts the tribulation. The tribulation will begin when the Antichrist signs a security treaty with Israel. There could be a period of several years between the time of the rapture and the beginning of the tribulation.